So, Tribe, we're back here today with Snake Blocker, and we're going to be talking today specifically about some of the Native American traditions. Apache Knife Battle Tactics is the program that Snake teaches, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that today, talk about the strategy, the principles, and some of the physical techniques. For those of you who are not familiar with Apache Knife Battle Tactics, it was featured on an episode of The Deadliest Warrior. You can find that on YouTube. You can find that all over the web. And I just want to welcome Snake back so we can go ahead and get started. How are you doing tonight, Snake?
Great, and just want to say hi to all the tribe people and all the people listening. I appreciate you all.
Great. Now, Snake, Apache Knife and Apache Battle Tactics in general is actually how we met. At the time, I was training with one instructor that was teaching that type of material, and you blipped on our radar, and I, wanted to reach out and, meet you. So I remember giving you a call, and we kind of hit it off and talked. And luckily, we've had the opportunity to meet in person and do some training in person. Tell me a little bit about your experience with the Native American martial arts. It's something kind of controversial. A lot of people don't believe that they actually exist. I find that comical, considering that they were the preeminent warriors of an entire continent, and they must have had a way of fighting. You don't become good at warfare without having, some type of understanding of combat. So tell me how you got started. Again, you're just one of a very few people that are publicly teaching this kind of material, so fill us in.
Sure. So going back to what you're saying about the Native American arts, so first of all, the word martial meaning warlike or war content, so warrior art or martial art, you're looking at a particular culture. Every culture in the world since time immemorial has had a martial art. They've had a warrior society. They've had a warrior concept of some form at some level or another. The Apaches, if you're looking at them as a whole, you're talking about 70 different types of bands, clans, regional tribes that encompass that, and they spread out through many now states, and that includes the northern portions of Mexico. So when I talk about the Apache knife fighting and battle tactic, we use the word knife only because it's more practical to now, and knife is something everybody had. The other battle tactic applications are stuff they use with the tomahawk, with the bow and arrow, with the lance, that type of thing. And people have to think about cultures. What they do is cultures dominate other cultures, or whether it's defending or attacking other people. So just kind of giving a little bit of history, the reason why the Apaches kind of have been noted as the ultimate in guerrilla warfares among the Native Americans is because of all the recorded Native American tribes that were, put down in history of some form or another. The Apaches, stood out more than all the other tribes because they, caused more havoc and financial burden to the coming in U.S. government, U.S. cavalry. So that's kind of where they got their reputation of being the most fierce, the most brutal, because they destroyed more property than any other tribe in recorded history. The Comanches came in, second, and then everything else falls very short of that. That being said, because was over 70 types of Apaches, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were all the exact same. We'll say DNA, for lack of a better term, necessarily all from one type of tribe, because there could have been Apaches fighting other Apaches. Apache was, according to some historians, a Zuni word, which it was, that means the enemy. And then on the other side, there's an old Spaniard word that actually sounds a lot like Apache, but it means a raccoon because the Apache warriors that they came in contact with had the war markings around their eyes, which give them the appearance of a raccoon. So one or both of those are somewhat, they have true depending on who you talk to. So that's kind of where the word came out. So the Apaches never called themselves Apaches until much later. They just called themselves men or the people. So that's just a little brief background. And like I said earlier, I don't care if you're talking about Asian culture or an African culture or whatever, every society in the world from time immemorial has had a form of martial art. It's just the way that their warriors of that society that protected their areas, how they trained, how they fought. Even if you look at a peaceful nation, some people say, well, there's some peaceful nations. Not really. Even the monks, who were a peaceful people, they still studied a martial arts. Whether they used it all the time or whether they used it more for show or demonstration or meditation, it was still their version of it. So that's just kind of clarity on that part. And then what was the second part to your question?
Well, I wanted to get some background on how you began your journey learning the warrior ways from the Apache perspective.
And that's right. So since I was, since I could pretty much walk, shortly after that, I was given a knife by my grandfather. And, for my family, it's not a big deal to have weapons, even as a kid. And you were taught to respect them and to, appreciate them and to use them for what they're intended to. And in my case, as a kid, I had a knife because it's what I cut the apples with, cut the oranges with. It's a regular pocket knife. And, you went around and you hiked and you took off for the whole day, and then you came back at the end of the day, and, your parents said, oh, you have fun, and that's kind of it. It was a lot different than it is in society now. So ever since I can remember, I had a knife with me, and ever since I remember, I was learning about some form or another, either self-teaching or among families, peers, friends, other tribal members, of different survival tactics that fall into hunting, fishing, that fall into tracking, that fall into man tracking, that fall into, war games, that type of thing. So just as long as I can remember, I've always had a fascination for that. What happened was I started doing a lot more researching in my early 20s, and I started meeting other Apaches and realized, we're so spread out now, and there's only a few tribes, even among all the natives, that have any type of community tribal reservation where some of them stay in one area. Everybody else has been integrated into normal society with their own houses, their own properties, and their own particular community, not necessarily part of the Apaches. So I decided when I was probably about 21, 22, I got to start recording people's histories. So as I would meet an Apache here or there, I would find out their stories. What's your story? What's your family background? What were your grandparents teaching you? Is there anything that I can learn from, any legends, that type of thing? And because I realized that's how I found out there were so many more Apaches as I was going out. They would tell me their clan and their band. And I just kind of did my own little jot notes down. And after a while, I started realizing that there's actually quite a few people that, in telling me their stories, they were saying, oh, yeah, my father taught me how to make a bow and arrow this way. Or, yeah, my father or grandfather or uncle taught me dirt wrestling. They said that was taught by his parents, and his parents passed them. And then the other person talked about these games or these legends and that type of thing. And I realized, wow, there's a lot of overlap between people's histories and cultures that is being passed down in an oral fashion that can be recorded as not so much a martial art, but as a way of preserving our culture and how we defended our lands and stayed one of the most active rebel tribes and, up until, the 1950s, 60s, 70s. I mean, there were still renegade Apaches even there, and even today they have renegade Apaches that still live in northern plains or northern mountains of Mexico, but drug cartel land. So I said, this is really fascinating, and the more I started to get involved with it, I'm also growing, keep in mind, with my martial art training. And, I was introduced with some other weapon system. I'm like, this is nice as a martial arts system and to integrate it with our empty hand techniques and kicking techniques, but it's not the same practical application that I'm being taught from other people that was passed down. In other words, it's not teaching you, if you're in a war zone, in a military war zone, and you've got multiple people and you have to use what's around you, the only way you're going to get out of that situation is to eliminate the enemy. That's where the Apache knife fighting battle tactics take this approach. Now, you don't want to go out, or at least I did not as a martial art instructor, teaching these as, hey, here's a martial art move, because then there's a liability and a responsibility between people using it, for good or bad, and getting into legal ramifications for that. So I said, I'm going to teach stuff that's being passed down to me, and I'm going to teach it in a format that's a history lesson, just like as if you were studying the Mongols, and how they invaded, and took over the Asian countries, or Alexander the Great, and those cultures. So if I approach it in that sense, it's not like I'm telling you go out and kill people and cut their throats and cut their head off and scalp them. I'm just saying, hey, this is a part of history that was passed down from oral traditions, and it overlaps some into written history, but very little. And study it as your own way of developing and learning a history with a situation where if you got into a worst case scenario, what would you really do? Would you do a traditional martial art move? And would that work with multiple attackers with weapons? Or can you utilize something around you, whether it's a knife, something that looks like a tomahawk, a hiking axe, or whatever, and apply that to your self-defense situation?
Now, Snake, when you were collecting this information, you've come into contact with a lot of people, and like you said, it wasn't all coming from one source, but from all of the encounters that you had with other Apaches. What were some of the more important or more what's the word I'm looking for? A little bit more focused lessons that you learned as far as the combat aspects of the culture?
Well, what I would say that my favorite things that I love teaching and that I absorbed the most efficiently and practically was the Apache legends that carry over into how they named a lot of their tactics, and how if you teach a kid a story, they're hearing a story, they're hearing a fictitious character, and it just draws into the back of their head. And then when they come of age to learn raids and battle tactics and things of that sort as they get initiated into a warrior society, they remember that story. And you could say, hey, do you remember the story of the raven, for example? Or do you remember the story of the great elk? Do you remember how the spiders protected themselves from the elk digging in? Do you remember the story of the elk using its antlers, and just different things like that? And then it's going to click right away. And then you teach them, well, this is, instead of the antler, this is the knife is the antler. Instead of the hoof of the horse, it's actually going to be the butt of a tomahawk, and those integrations really made a lot of sense because it helps you understand how the Apache came across situations. How do you teach a kid? He's 12 years old now. He's considered, acceptable age to be a warrior society and to jump in and kill people. How do you do that transition? You don't just bring him in from bedtime stories to defending their community. You have to gradually indoctrinate them via the fictitious ideas. And if you say, now you're a bear, attack like a bear, that makes sense to a young kid, a young warrior. You can't just expect a kid to say, go out there and jump on that guy's neck and stab him in the middle of their skull. The kid's not going to do that.
Now, Snake, when the Apaches were in combat, tell us a little bit about some of the, and not so much, isolated martial arts techniques, but tell us a little bit about some of the tactics that they use, because they are studied till this day. I know that the modern military is still looking at Apache warfare tactics and still using that as a teaching tool to teach, modern servicemen. What about the Apaches made them so effective? Tell us a little bit about those tactics.
Well, what made them memorialized, so to speak, and like you said, the war colleges today, the top organizations, and not just in the U.S., but Apaches are known in pretty much every country, every continent for sure of the world. I know that just from my traveling, and they understand, they know what Apache is, and media has to do with that too, because they make cowboys and they make movies, and typically it's the Apaches that are going to be represented over a lot of other tribes, so to speak. That being said, I just lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Repeat the question.
Well, tell us what specifically were some of the tactics that made the Apaches such effective warriors.
So the reason for that is because when you're studying cultures, and I don't care if it's Alexander the Great, like I said earlier, or they look at what are the societies out there that had few and conquered many. So that's the first thing that they look at, and what lessons can be learned, because we have to see how we can duplicate that even with today's modern society, and with today's modern technology. Can we send a group of 6 Navy SEALs in there, and can they accomplish more than sending 1,000 troops in there? Can we use their concealment? Can we use their integration into a culture to blend in? And that's kind of how it's being used, in more modern terms. But it's because of their stealth, their ability to know their terrain very well, their recorded endurance that allowed them to go miles upon miles, as much as 50 plus miles in a day's time, running on foot through mass terrain. They got horses, and the ability for their foot to go over terrain that horses had difficulty going and covering more ground, having less baggage to be able to go many hours without water or minimum sources of water. So their survival ability and their ability to not just physically condition themselves to sustain rough terrain, rough temperatures, extreme heat, extreme colds, the fact that they're able to also sneak up on the enemy and eliminate the enemy without them even seeing them. So they would say a lot of times the Apaches like a ghost. You hear the whisper of the wind, and then you turn around and your partner's dead, and you don't see anybody. Their tactics primarily across the board were go in with small amounts of people, sneak in during the nighttime especially, go in there, take, kill, do what you need to do, and get out as quick as possible. And it's a little different model from modern military, which I'm in still, where you hear the Army's model of leave no man behind, and that was the opposite of what the Apaches taught. Apache said, so if you're in trouble, it's your fault, and we'll try to help you at some other stage, but right now we gotta save ourselves, because if we try to rescue you, you're probably going to kill more of us. And people went into battle understanding that.
Now, Snake, you mentioned two things. The first, and let's tackle these in order. The first is the physicality of the Apaches, and second, the ability to move quietly, to understand those stealth skills. I remember in my time training in Apache martial arts, one of the biggest lessons that I learned just from having conversations with my instructor and having conversations with you, reading your books, which were excellent as a way to really illustrate that. But they had a very physical regimen. They were very strong. Like you said, endurance was key. But what I learned that struck me as most important was a kind of worldview as far as hardship. And I remember my instructor telling me things like, well, I'm an Apache, so yeah, it may hurt, but I'm not going to show it to you. Or, I'm not used to, comfort. That was something that was kind of ingrained into the culture. They were not, a comfortable people, from my understanding. How did that all play into, them developing as warriors?
Well, I think that's true. And I'm not just saying that Apaches had all the answers, because you can look through history and you can find many, many, many hundreds of other cultures that, same thing, they grew up in harsh environments. They had to survive. They're not just fighting one, but multiple sides of enemies. What made it so rough on Apaches was the fact that they were rapidly spreading through different areas, old Mexico and several other states, even further as north as up in Canada. That being said, now they've got enemies from all sides. They had many other native tribes that were at war with them as well. A good example would be the Lipan Apache, which is my tribe, which covered the majority of the bottom half of Texas today and up into northern Mexico. And then you had the Comanche tribe that was very predominant and large group in the second upper northern part of Texas. And the buffaloes, where they had to do their yearly herds and their traveling, would go to the center of Texas. And the Apaches are there doing their bison hunting, and then the Comanches just came down to their bison hunting. And then you get two, even if you don't call them warrior cultures, hunting cultures, and there's a limited amount of resources, and you got to be all the same riverbanks, you got to be all this stuff like that. You got to provide for your entire tribe, and they got to do the same thing, and there's going to be conflict. They got battles against the Comanches, and you got the French coming in from another direction, and they're selling guns to other native tribes to take out other tribes, and eventually, turn on the tribes they gave the guns to. And then you have the English who didn't want to sell guns to natives, but they were fighting the French, and you had those battles, and then the Apaches in between. Even the Alamo, the chief at that time of the Lipan Apache tribe down that area, he was willing to fight against the Mexicans, and he was waiting for word from the Alamo because he was friends with Houston. So there's just a lot of history that's integrated with them. But the point I'm trying to make is that you have, dozens of enemies, dozens of tribes of other Apaches that are fighting for resources, fighting for water, fighting for bison, fighting for other game. And then you have the French French, the Germans, the Dutch, the English people, the Spaniards, the Portuguese, all coming in. Some are coming in for gold or silver, and they want slaves. Some people just want the land. Some people want other resources. And that made it harder and harder. So their life became harsher and harsher as the turn of the century. They had no choice. They had to survive. They had to spread out. They had to have the endurance and the prowess that they're known for, or they'd be extinct. And the proud part about our culture is that we are still around, and we've been involved in every single battle in the entire history of the America as we know it today.
Now, Stake, the other thing that jumped out from what we were talking about is the Apache Scout training. And the Apache were famous for their abilities as scouts. I would wager that the majority of modern tracking schools and survival schools are all drawing in some way or another from Apache traditions. It's somewhat comical, but I recall a friend of mine who was involved with a large ninjutsu organization. And I asked him, I said, well, tell me about it. Did you learn about, infiltration skills? Did you learn about, silent walking, field navigation? And he, kind of pulled the curtain back. He said, yeah, they kind of talk about all that stuff, but all the guys that are good at it, they all go to the tracker camps that are teaching Apache skills, and then they bring it back and they try to integrate it. So they had that much respect for, even from other traditions, would seek out, Apache training to be able to better what they were already learning in their schools. So tell me about the Apache Scouts, and I'm especially curious about the role they've played in, like you said, they've been, Apaches have been in every major conflict, in the history of the Americas. How were they utilized in some of the campaigns later in time?
Sure, and just to piggyback on what you said about the ninjutsu organizations, the Japanese who are very proud people, they're one of the proudest people in the world probably today. They think themselves superior in many ways to Westerners and any other culture, which is nothing wrong with that. That being said, they do, even today and in the past, they did call the Apaches the first American ninja for that same reason, because they realized that, wow, these people are standing out. They are the stealth tribe. They are the people that are going in there and scouting and sneaking in and out of encampments. And that was good to hear, because that was much later kind of revealed that it had been documented for the Japanese to be saying that, which is pretty cool. Going back to what you're saying about the scouting, initially the U.S. cavalry was having very little success finding tribes that they wanted to eliminate or, capture or whatever, make prisoners of war. Because as soon as they went into an area and encampment on one particular tribe or another, they would just disperse, and they had their own hiding areas and that type of thing. Well, the Apaches were well versed not just on their terrain, but the surrounding terrain that they would pass through because of the difficulty of going through other tribes' areas. Because there was no Google map back then, they had markers that were familiar with many of the natives, most familiar with the tribe of which territory it encompassed. But they were experts pathfinders. So a pathfinder is somebody that knows how to identify markers that have been changed in landscapes that will determine which path to take, which ones are the main roads, how to get in here, how to go in and out of other tribal people's territory based on those markers. So in today's, realm of, as you're driving around, you got street signs everywhere. And the street signs tell you to go north here, or left here, or right here. And these roads will intersect. They tell you when there's a dead end. Well, that was always around too with the Native Americans, and specifically with the Apaches, and the Apaches knew how to read these land markers. So one example would be, say the Kikuyu tribe, they had a territory not too far from the Apaches, and they had markers where they would take boulders and they would put them in one specific pattern. And if you pass by that pattern, that particular pattern meant that you need to either left or go east to find the next marker. The Apaches knew how to recognize that symbol. They also knew how to they were one of the few tribes that would have the moccasin that would kind of point and then curl up, because it made a specific foot pattern, and they knew that if they were tracking whatever, they can recognize the Apache moccasin footprint and know which moccasin it belonged to. Do you find this tribe, this clan, whatever? And that's where they wouldn't get confused with other tribes. So they would wear a very similar moccasin with the curl up and the point. And the U.S. Cavalry realized that too, how good they were at tracking other tribes. And so they kind of recruited who they could to go out there and say, hey, where do these guys go? And they're like, yeah, we'll find them. There's a pathfinder here. We know all the egress areas and their safety areas, and we'll take you right to them. Initially, the cavalry would go in contact with them. There'd be a battle, which would ensue, and the U.S. Cavalry men either purposely or unintentionally would shoot Apaches as well. And that's where they said, we're not going to scout for you to the U.S. Cavalry unless you basically make it very clear to not shoot our own people in these conflicts, because we're fighting the natives with you. So then at that point, that's when they determined to wear the red bandanas. So the cavalry was delegated to not shoot any native that has a red bandana, because that is their own scout. That's the Apache scout working with the U.S. Cavalry.
Now, Snake, we've kind of gone through some of the history of the Apache and their battle tactics. You have put together a program, and like I said before, there are several other instructors out there that are teaching something similar. A very small group. I think I could count the ones that I'm aware of on one hand. What are you looking to do now with bringing all of the information that you've collected? What do you want to do with the martial arts community? What are your goals as far as that information, that reservoir of knowledge that you have now?
So we have a book on, if you go to blurb, BLURB.com, and just type in Snake Blocker, it'll pop up Apache Knife Fighting, we call it Apache Journey Warrior 1, or Apache Warrior Journey 1, excuse me. And there'll be a whole series. There'll be a number 2, 3, 4, 5, that type of thing. I have enough material for a couple more books. I just have to sit down and actually put it together. And it's in textbook form, so we're going to pay textbook fees, just like if you went to college and spent a couple $100 on a book. It has that format because of the pictures in there and the quality of the book and the hardcover, tabletop, all that stuff. Or you get it as PDF or ebook, a lot less, like $29 for those digital ones. But the end goal on my end is, if I could make the people, first of all, the people that I've recorded oral history from, their stories live on. So if that's all that I've accomplished, then I'm happy, because probably about 85% of what's in my book you won't find in any other Apache history book. Not because it's not history, because most Apache books or any Native American books are not written by their own tribes. They're written from outsiders' points of view, and then they kind of, it's based on the conqueror's perspective of what went on. What I do is I take certain things of the history books, and I say, okay, well, this is happening in this time frame, and then this also happened at this time frame, and I try to take several different history books and kind of show you where the patterns are, where the most conflicts were, what types of states have the Apaches noted as fighting. So you'll have a little bit of that in there, but that becomes dry after a while. The first journey book is more an eclectic collection of a little bit of everything that I collected. The second book is going to be more chapter orientated, so you're going to have a very large chapter on foods and that type of thing that they have made. Another section on medicinals and the medicine men and medicine women and what they use in Apache to help their people, or the poisons that they would use. And then another chapter will be on, like more of the battle tactics. Say this is the angles of attack, this is how they called them. Keep in mind though that because I acquired the information from so many people, and every year I think more Apaches from different tribes. It's an ongoing research, because it's unlimited resources out there. I just got to meet everybody, get their stories before they die, and record it into history. You might hear a story 2 different times, 3 different, or 2 or 3 different ways, but it's going to have the same baseline story. It's just like a fairy tale. You have 5 different ways of telling the story of Cinderella. We see that in the movies as well. So there is spin-offs, but what I don't want people to get out of it is I'm a founder of a system, or this is an official martial art. How I formulated it is I put it down into 5 journeys, and the journeys is just like a history class. You have there's 101, 102, 103, 104. It's kind of like that, where you got math and you got geometry and you got calculus, that type of progression. So when it's all said and done, are you a black belt? No. But have you accomplished, a portion of the history in addition to showing an application of the techniques and tactics? And are you well-versed in knife? If the answer is yes, then I'm going to give you a certificate that says Journey 1, Apache Scout. If you're proficient at the tomahawk, you can apply the applications from the history from what we have in there, and you can tell me the history more so than the first level, then that's kind of like level 2 or Journey 2, we call it, and that's more tomahawk focus. And then the Journey 3 is more war club focus, which is the small rock Apache war club, but it also incorporates some of the rifle stock and the larger type weaponry that was improvised as a club. And then you have the next journey, or level, would be more of the bow and arrow and the lance. And then you have doing that in addition to knowing knife, stick, bow, rock, throwing, all that stuff like that. You're incorporated into more of a history lesson with horseback riding and movable targets and that type of thing. So it just gives people a way of saying, hey, I've learned this much history. I want to learn more history. I focused on this weapon for this journey. I want to focus on this weapon for that journey. And it's just another way of using a history format with a little overlap on the martial arts side.
Now, Snake, you are an advanced practitioner and instructor of edge weapons, impact weapons from other traditions, Filipino traditions. I know you've done weapons work as far as Japanese weapons as well, and a whole lot of background in your repertoire. Help us to understand, help the audience to kind of get an idea of the physical, practical martial applications of the Apache approach to weaponry. What are some of the things that a new student may expect to find that is different from, what he may pick up in an Arnis class or a Kenjutsu class? What do you think are some of the things that are unique to the Apache way of handling weaponry?
Sure. And to start off, I want to say that I respect and I love every single martial art that's out there. And I don't care if you're taking Tai Chi Gong, I don't care if you're taking Taekwondo, any type of karate system, Kung Fu system, kickboxing, Muay Thai, MMA. There is benefit for everyone individually. And if you're adding respect to that, more power to you, and I love it. And there's not a martial art that I haven't jumped in a class for that I didn't enjoy and didn't learn something from. So that being said, yes, I have training in the sword, Japanese sword. I had a year of foil fencing. Then I have a first degree black belt in Filipino stick and knife fighting, archipelago combatives, or the Kali Eskrima Arnis concepts. And then I have my highest rank in weapon is the Bali Song knife fighting system, which is specific to, it's everything from the flash of the butterfly knife to the application to the pull out of it and how to demonstrate it at different points and different handle positions of the butterfly knife or the Bali Song, which is also based on the Filipino martial arts. That being said, the thing I love about the Filipino martial arts is the fact that it's a high skill level of coordination and flow, and I give them huge amounts of kudos for that field and that venture. What I don't like as much about all the weapon systems that I've experienced is it's more focused on one-on-one, that dueling concept. What Apache battle tactics and knife fighting and all that stuff differentiates is the fact that it's not about points or first tap or first strike, and it's always about stealth, back attack being the first option, sneak up behind them. Element of surprise is huge, and multiple attackers. And then inside of that, you have, when you get to the higher levels with me anyway, with the journeys, you're also required to do what the Apaches did. Like you talked about, you alluded to at the beginning, their harsh environment. You have to add that application into it. And you know this as well as anybody else, you can't always train in air-conditioned mat areas because that's not the reality of outside concrete in the heat of summer. gonna have you react differently in those situations than the nice mat, because you're not gonna think, man, I could jump on a person and slam my knees on the pad. It's not gonna hurt me, but you're gonna rethink that when there's an asphalt that you got to jump on. So we tell people, at the higher levels for sure, now take what you know about knife, tomahawk, lance, bow and arrow, horse riding, all that stuff, and now let's put you in freezing water. We're going to do our training in that today. Okay, now we're going to do it on a rock, but you got to do your drill. First, you got to climb that rock, scale it, and then you got to train on top of that rock. And you got to do it before your partner does, because he's going to have more time to rest by the time you get up there. And he's probably going to strike you before you get to the top. And then let's do something in the valley. Let's do something in the sand pit. Let's do something in the snow. Let's do something in a sand dune, and the list goes on and on. So they have to experience training in all 4 seasons at bare minimum.
Now, Snake, one of the things that I took away from my time training in Apache Arts was deception. Most of the martial arts that I've done, most of the weapon arts I've done, like you said, are geared towards dueling, but they were also very very direct as far as the confrontation. It was, guy A tries to tag guy B and back and forth and repeat. My first exposure, and I'm sure this exists in other martial arts, but my first real exposure to deception as a tactic was within the Apache Arts. And it was something that, in my experience, ran through virtually everything that we learned and in the way that we were going to apply things. It was something that really got me thinking and changed my whole mindset on the training. How do you apply that concept, to your training with your students?
The first thing is just to do it outdoors. And then I'll give you one example. One of the drills we do is we blindfold the person, and then they have, various terrains to do this exercise in, but we'll just say one terrain is partial rock, partial twigs, partial, dirt. And then we have 10 students around him, and I'll just send out maybe 1 student, maybe 4 students, maybe 10 students. And they're supposed to walk from point A, maybe like 10 feet away, and walk past him and maybe another 5 to 10 feet away. And then I'll have him release the blindfold, and then he has to tell me how many people just passed him, because that's where the trickery comes in, because it's the student's role to be as quiet as possible in their passing. But then also if they don't choose to do that route, they can also do multiple. They can use their hand to make sound of more feet, and they can walk on all fours to make the guy blinded think that there is more people than there is, because Apaches use both tactics. They try to do stuff too. That's why you hear the battle cries a lot of times, because they echo it out, and you can have 10 people sound like 50 people, and then they'll bring up the dust clouds, and they'll go in circles, and then they'll kind of crisscross, and then when you see it from the distance, it looks like there's double the amount of people that they have. And then same thing when they're trying to sneak up upon somebody, they want them to know that there's a lot of people coming when there's only a small amount, or there might be a lot of people, and they have to be so quiet that they only think there's at most 1 or 2 people. So to use all the sensories, that's what I want people to take away, even at the early levels. You've got your 5 senses, you've got your 6 senses, however many you want to utilize them.
Now, Snake, one thing that I took away from my interaction with you, and I actually, with your blessing, incorporated this into one of my books, was the light training. And that's one thing I found fascinating. Tell me about that.
Sure. So, the main thing is that your eyes will adapt differently. In fact, people don't know this, but, we've been integrated by media to say it's summertime, buy your Oakley sunglasses, buy your Ray-Ban glasses. These are polarized. Spend $300 on a glass because it's going to save your eyes, and you got to protect your eyes, and you have to avoid the sun from noon to 3 o'clock because that's when you're going to get skin cancer and blah, blah, blah. Well, none of that is actually, there's a very small part of that that's true. On the beneficial side, it's actually not beneficial for you to wear sunglasses because it doesn't allow your eyes to adapt to the natural lighting around you and your sun. And it's tricking your eyes, and it's teaching your eyes, especially if they're polarized lenses, the opposite. It's going to be harder and more difficult for you to make adjustments as light changes from nighttime to dark or from dark to light. Another thing is it's bad for your skin if you're out between 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock. Well, it's actually been proven that people with occupational jobs that are outside more, like the Apaches were all the time, they actually adapt and they have the lowest amount of skin cancers, fights the people that are indoors 5 days a week and then they go out and get burnt, because your body gets burnt when it gets shocked to the sunlight and the UAV rays and the UV rays. The same thing happens with the eyes. The eyes go through a shock. We don't want to be shocking the body from light to dark, dark to light. So the Apaches, first of all, they only wore sunglasses, and not that there was even sunglasses back then, but they understood the principle of your body and your brain need to learn at certain times of the days. Your pupils need to expand on some days, and sometimes they need to constrict. And they would do that also by blindfolding one side of their eye if they knew that they were going to do a lot of night attacks. So if the person, if they were going to an area where there's a lot of light, a lot of fire, a lot of brighter lights, and both lights are going to get shocked, they only want one eye to be shocked. Once they get past those lights and those flickers and those fire pits, then they would take off that second marker on the eye, and they have an eye that's already adapted to total darkness, and they'd be able to see a lot clearer than anybody else. So that's kind of one of the approaches. So going back to the Apache training, you're required to do them in the daylight and the sunlight, and go back and forth from one position to another, and be able to adapt yourself either with an eye patch or closing one eye, so you can actually do well in those scenarios. And you're only as good as you can see. Somebody throws sand in your eyes, which is a technique among several different weapons techniques, it's going to be a problem. The Apaches would also grind pepper and use that as a target to throw it, salt, pepper, those types of things. There's a lot of spices that will burn the eyes, and they would have those in little pellets to be able to throw them in the eyes if they're worried about the person being outnumbered, or they had it's basically the old form of pepper spray.
Now, Snake, I've had people ask me, because of our friendship, they've asked me, what are his classes like? What are the knife classes like? And what my honest response usually is, the thing that jumps out for me most is your drills. And from my perspective, I think you're one of the most creative instructors that I've run across in terms of the types of drills that you use. And just kind of talking about the drills with terrain and with the different lighting, it gives a very different kind of holistic approach to training. It's things you don't find in other places. And in some of my conversations with other instructors from different Native American backgrounds, one of the things that I see as a common theme there is games. Do your drills, and again, you're an artist when it comes to the drills. I envy, your creativity with putting these drills together. Does that come from a cultural place as far as the games in the traditional society?
Yeah, and just so the listeners understand, when and I believe I'm on the same page with you, a game would be something that you play maybe as a kid, and then it applies to battle tactics. So one of the common games that Apache children played, you had a round circular loop. Basically, it looks like a hula hoop, and you would roll it vertically, so it's rolling like a tire wheel would. And then the Apache children, as it passes them, they had to throw a spear through it, or they had to throw a knife through it, or they had to throw a tomahawk or a rock or whatever. And then they would also have to dive through it as it's going through and learn about balance and readjusting from a fall. And then as a kid, that's a fun game. And then you apply it as a battle tactics, and now you have that eye-hand coordination. You have that ability to target and hit center mask a moving target without even thinking twice about it. You have knife drills where you have to toss knives at each other, and if you catch it the wrong way, you're going to get cut. And after a while, it starts out like a game, and after a while, you get pretty good at it. And then you realize, well, in battle, you may lose your weapon, and your buddy tosses you a weapon. Well, it's only as good as you catching it, holding the grip. And it's better to catch it with two hands and then readjust to one hand versus just going with one hand. So we teach that. And okay, what if a person's standing up with the other person down? They're both down, they're both tossing. The toss is a spin, the toss is a nice flow to it. Practice all of those ones. Tossing the spear and reusing the spear as another throw projectile. Another thing people have to realize is that some people say, well, Apache's never had an axe. Well, first of all, every freaking culture had some type of axe. I don't know if we call it a tomahawk or an axe or a tool. They had some type of either stone axe in the old days, and as metal was introduced, they had metal and obsidian stones and that type of thing. Obsidian stone can be just as sharp as any other cutting razor. In fact, it's still used in the medical profession. So it's, when you cut well on a flint and you're an expert at flinting, you can get it just as sharp as any other knife as well. So when people say, oh, the tomahawk wasn't indigenous to the Apaches, it's absolutely not true. In fact, every Native American culture that I've heard of has had some form of tomahawk or axe. They've had some form of spear. They've had some form of war club. They've had some form of bow and arrow. They've had some form of, horses were the ones those were integrated, and obviously rifles and pistols and, all the new modern warfares. But Apaches were always adaptive and willing to learn the new skills. When horses were introduced in the 1600s, they became expert riders, bareback and such. When weapons were introduced and the French were selling it to them, they became expert shooters. So that's how you have to teach. If you're a martial artist and you have to adapt, that's why I tell people, you don't want to get your black belt. Let's just say it takes you 10 years to get your black belt. Some people say, and I hear this all the time, I've been doing martial arts for 20 years. Well, tell me about it. Well, I spent 7 years getting my black belt and my second degree black belt by 10 years. And now I have a school and I have these many students. I said, well, how many what is your highest ranking student? Oh, I got like 5 first degree black belts. Okay, well, it sounds like you studied for 10 years and you've been teaching people what you studied for 10 years. So you really haven't been taking martial arts for 20 years. You've been taking martial arts for 20 years and keeping up on what you learned so you don't forget it. So you're teaching other students to retain that information. But if you're telling me you've been studying martial arts for 30 years, there should be a progression, and every year you're putting on that white belt or you're putting on that low rank and you're gradually building up in a different entire system, or you're moving further higher black belt level of the system you're currently in. But the second you stop progressing and learning new arts and new levels of what you like to do, if you're not going out of that comfort zone, then don't say you've been doing martial arts for X amount of time.
Now, Snake, you touched on the Apaches and their adaptability. How vital and how crucial was that to them progressing as warriors on the battlefield? Because my conversations with some Apache were revealing a very pragmatic, view of adapting. There was no hint of, I want to stay tied to this weapon because this is how we've always done it, or I want to stay tied to this approach. It was much more pragmatic as far as, oh, that works? Okay, great. Let me pick it up and run with it and master it. Tell me about the Apaches and what they've adapted into their battle tactics over the many decades and years of training, and even taking it into the modern times with the modern military.
Sure. There's this Apache named Tex, is what they called him. He was the World War II. He was the top. He had more kills than anybody else in World War II as a machine gunner, and that's a great example because he took his adaptability, his approach, his warrior mentality that he was taught as a kid, and what he integrated into it to become the best at what he was, which was a machine gunner. And that's a modern weapon, and obviously it wasn't taught by his great grandparents, but when you understand concepts, when you understand principles, when you understand, the body moves a certain way, projectiles only go a certain angle, you have to make adjustments if you want to change those angles. You have to adjust distance based on shorter weapons or longer weapons. You have to size out the opponent and number. And if you can't outnumber them, then you try to sneak from behind and pick them off one at a time, or do deception, like you said, or distraction. I just tell people, I kind of stay away from the word deception, and I stay away from the word fighting dirty, because it's not. If you're in the battle, the only way to fight is, remembering the concept of all is fair in love and war. There's nothing dirty about fighting unfair, and I tell my students all the time, if it was a fair fight, you didn't prepare well enough. I don't want to hear about you squaring off with somebody and beating him because they say, oh, it's a fair fight, we both wear bare fists. That's not a fair fight. A fair fight means you both lost or you both won. That's what makes it fair, right? So as long as there's a winner and a loser, there's no fair fight. Anytime you watch a UFC fight, if somebody won, it wasn't a fair fight. Oh, yeah, it was. They were the same weight. They were the same style. That's not a fair fight because somebody won because they were better than that other person at that time and day. So they had a superior edge. So it was unfair. He was superior than the other fighter that lost. And you have to understand, like going into battle and survival mode, that you have to always realize that if for some reason they're smarter than you, stronger than you, have a better weapon than you, have more numbers than you, how can you make it as unfair to your advantage as possible? Well, I could sneak behind him and make sure he never sees me, or I could wait till 3 o'clock in the morning when he's sleeping and get him then, or I'll wait till he's drunk and finish eating on a full stomach, and I'll have him chase me and he'll have a cramp in his stomach and then I'll attack him. But you have to figure out what you need to do in every situation to adapt, or how can I take his weapon from him and use it against him. If one weapon's good, 2 weapons are better. 3 weapons are better. 4 weapons are better. You don't necessarily have to use all of them, but if I have the weapons, they don't. That's unfair. That's my advantage. That's the Apache way.
Snake, let me ask you a question, not so specific to the Apache, but in general with the concept of Native American martial arts. As I mentioned as we came into the interview, it is something that for some reason is very controversial in the community, in the martial arts community. People want to assume that if a native culture had a warfare system, that it must be extinct, it must have died out, and that's if they even accept it at all. I think that part of that has to do with the mentality that all martial arts will resemble some form of, modern or relatively modern structure, and that structure may not have existed in a different culture. But what are your thoughts on Native American martial traditions in general coming back into the mainstream, martial arts community?
Sure. I mean, you're correct about that. There was a huge paradigm shift in 2001. September 11th happened. And, I personally have a whole notion. Just a quick view. We started that whole thing. Our government was behind it. It didn't happen how it was projected on TV. But the long and the short of it is what the media told us and convinced us what had happened was that these terrorists that were sent from Bin Laden came over here. They used box cutter knives, and then they went in and they took over this airplane. So let's just look at the reality of it. If let's just say, you pick whoever you think is the most well-versed weapons expert, knife fighter in the entire world. You have 100 to 200, maybe more people on an airplane. And you're telling me that one, maybe even 2 of those guys took over an airplane and everybody else just stood there and didn't jump on him, didn't do anything like that. So that it's very far-fetched. And I know this because one of the guys who was on that list of terrorists, he came to my studio. This is in October, September 11th. I'm sorry, not October, July-August timeframe. And he came in, he paid cash, $100. He had a big wad of $100 bills all the time. He looked like a nerd. Nothing he said was, the more he trained, the more nothing made sense, because he said he had no background. He was obviously had martial arts skill set and military skill set from the sparring sessions and that type of thing. We did training knives. He kept asking up, the questions that made sense afterwards. Hey, how do I get a hold of the smallest knife possible? How do I get a hold of knives that are made of composite? All this stuff like this. How do I get these types of switchblades, butterfly knives? And he's asking all these questions. I'm not giving him I'm giving him very vague information, but I'm not helping him in that arena. But it just struck me odd because I could tell he liked me right away with him being first. As soon as September 11th happened, then it all made sense, because there was a very similar story up in Florida where 2 or more guys had the same story. These nerdy-looking guys, they wore glasses. The glasses were fake glasses. They weren't prescription glasses. Another thing that kind of set it off was the fact that he had left his cell phone at my studio after training. And usually if you leave your cell phone, you're there within the hour picking it up. And he just left it in my studio the entire day until the next time I trained him. And it never rang once, so it told me it was an outgoing phone only, not an incoming phone. And he would never park in my parking lot. He'd park in the next shopping center over, had a junkie record that I kind of picked up. Anyway, I called the FBI. They did nothing. I called the LA Vice Squad, who was a friend of Ernest Emerson, because I found out, he had talked about these Emerson knives, and I called my buddy up, and I said, by chance, look this guy's name up, see if he ordered anything. Sure enough, he ordered one of these knives. And I said, let's give that data to some other people. And he's like, oh, I'm friends with the terrorist vice squad down in LA. And so we had them come over, and then before you know it, they're taking the deal, and the FBI comes back at my place, and they're like, no, we're going to take it over. And I turned in the training knives that we used, and there was no fingerprints on them. He had tested out his fingerprints somehow, even though he was training without gloves. So there's a lot of other markers. But anyway, the point is that even that guy who is suspected to have been one of the trainers, he was the guy that was training his crew to do the knife training. He wasn't nearly my level. And there's people that, I know a lot of people that can outdo his. So I knew that it was pretty much impossible for anybody that was in that setting to have taken over an airplane. But going back to what I was saying earlier, the paradigm shift in the martial art community, if you looked at black belt magazines pre-September 11th, one, at most two, anybody had any advertisement for any type of knife combatives program in the martial arts. The day after September 11th, everybody and their brother is teaching martial arts. Now you got Kaji Kimbo knife fighting, you've got Karate Shotokan knife training, you've got, Taekwondo with the knife training, you got article after article, and it hasn't slowed down. Every type of international martial art magazine, Blitz magazines, all these other magazines that are big, Buddha magazine, they're all featuring every magazine several articles and several advertisements from who's who and their brother teaching a knife concept. That has also watered it down, and now people are confused. The general public doesn't know what's real. They just say, oh, I got to learn knife. Okay, I'm going to take this knife training. And it may or may not be legit. It may it may or may not have validity in a street fight. And unfortunately, in a lot of the cases, what they're teaching them is not what's going to work in a reality-based situation. And it also teaches them to be overconfident in the knife and think that, oh, that's the answer to every situation, and I want to engage. And then even some of these tournament-style fights that I've seen, they're being timed, and this guy's being stabbed like 100 times, and then he gets jiu-jitsu choked, and the jiu-jitsu guy's the winner. I'm like, this guy's been dead 20 stabs ago, They need to have it better formatted so that, as soon as there's a vital kill, stop the match and tell them he can't continue, because if that was a real knife, he would have been decapitated. So anyway, I'm not sure how well that answers your question, but since September 11th, and since everybody and their brother knows, they have to teach a knife system in there, because everybody knows that, it might happen again. There might be somebody in a plane with a knife. That never happened. Those guys got caught before they even went to the airport, just so you guys know. You're not gonna do a weekend course in knife and have the right amount of confidence that's going to help you in a survival situation. So that's what I wanted to put across.
Now, Snake, what are your opinions? And I know this may sound silly, but there seemed to be a period of time there in general where Native American culture, in a very kind of capsulated form, especially what people want to believe is Native American spirituality, kind of became in vogue. And I saw something very similar with that as far as the martial arts, where the Native American, martial traditions became in vogue. A lot of the people that were professing to teach Native American martial culture were at best questionable. You've put in a lifetime of work into collecting real information from real people, real tradition. How do you feel about, the people out there teaching that may not be as sincere, with the material they're putting out there, and granted, they may have been misled themselves, or, they may have, other motives for doing this. But what are your thoughts on that, on some of the people that are claiming to teach Native American martial traditions, but may not exactly be doing that?
Sure. So look at them and see if they've been teaching it before it was mainstream. Because when I was growing up, it was not popular to be Native American. I was the one that was picked on. I was the one that was made fun of. I had to learn how to fight because I was being bullied constantly. Throughout all my elementary school and part of the high school. It took until later on, also because I was short in stature for a number of years, and then I kind of shot at, second year of high school. But if they've been teaching before September 11th, there's probably some legitimacy to them. And I don't claim to be a subject matter expert in Native American art, because Native American art is a compilation of hundreds, if not thousands, of different tribes and bands. So there may be somebody out there in good faith that really knows about his culture and past, and studied stuff similar to how I studied with other people and other tribes, clansmen, and they put together something. So what am I? don't know. I don't know anything about his tribe. I don't study his tribe. All I study is Apache knife fighting battle tactics, and I get constantly asked, "Oh, what did the Cherokee do? Oh, what did the Ute do? What did the Pueblos do?" I'm like, I have no idea. I don't study any of that. It's enough for me to study just the Apache side of it, and then within the Apaches, you have several clans. To my credit, I've been doing this. I've been teaching it since 1995. So if you can find me somebody that spent 20 years collecting research, and somebody that's compiled it, and what I taught in 1995 was a very small portion compared to what I teach now, just because my expansion of knowledge has been increased over meeting more Apaches, and you find somebody that's met more variety of Apaches than I have, and then we'll talk, But I mean, I'm not going to put anybody down because I don't know their situation. I just tell, instead of putting blame on a particular instructor or putting them down, because that's not my place. It's not what I do. I just say, hey, if you're a student, if you're a potential student, do your homework and say, hey, are they respectable? Do they have a track record of being respectful? Are they a law-abiding citizen? Are they out there just to make a name for themselves? Or are they out there to really enhance the culture and keep the culture alive? Are they somebody that's going to demean every other martial arts system out there and say, there's the best? Run away from those instructors. Anytime you go to any martial arts school, any guided school, any Native American program, and they say theirs is the best, no, I don't say we're the best. I said there's a lot of great warrior cultures out there. And I mean, the Japanese had a lot of great cultures. There's African tribes that have had great cultures. Is that culture still alive today? Ask that question. Did they survive? Did what they did and the adaptation they did, were they smart enough to integrate into the changes in the world? Apaches are still around. We've obviously have a track record. Did we make mistakes? Did we kill people we shouldn't? Absolutely. Did we rape people? I'm sure we did. I mean, there was havoc and mayhem from all directions. Does that make it right? No, it doesn't make it right. But it just tells you that was how certain people reacted. And you can't look at one tribe or one Apache member and use that as a dictation, because it's just like, I could talk to, a million Caucasians, and I could say, what's your worldview? What's your religion? What's your political viewpoint? And I could get a different answer from every single one. Same thing with Apaches. You could ask thousands of Apaches and say, what's your viewpoint on this? What do you know about this history? And you're going to get all these different answers, as I have. And I say, okay, the stuff that's reparable, the stuff that I know was passed down legitimately, I'm going to write that down. If it's something that's opinionated and more changed over time, I'm like, well, that's more about your opinion. I'll put down that people in your tribe might believe this. And here's a great example, the Hickory Apaches. I got many friends in that tribe, and to them, the snake is a bad omen. Then you talk to the Lipan Apaches, and to them, the snake is a good omen. It's a symbol of strength, of shedding your skin and moving forward and not looking back in your past. So for a Hickory to say, oh, Apaches believe this. No, you could say Hickory believe this. You could say Mescaleros believe this. You could say San Carlos believe this. Or the majority of people I know that are from this tribe believe this. But you can't listen to one person talk about one tribe of Apache and take it for gold that all the other Apaches train that way or don't train that way. Because some Apaches were high plains, some of them were in the mountainous rocky areas, some were in the valley, some were in the water level areas, and they had a different concept. They have a different model. Some had boats, some didn't need them. Some had horses, some didn't need them. Some lived in caves, some lived in wicked-poots, some lived in teepees, some lived in transitional stone structures made out of petrified logs, and the list goes on and on. There's such diversity with our culture.
Snake, now, for my final question for you for tonight, and for the audience out there, they know that our Raven tribe is dedicated to developing warriorship as a lifestyle, and we have, a certain way of doing that. other martial cultures have had, certain codes and guidelines to kind of help, the development of the warrior. Was there something that was codified and, a solid guideline within the Apache culture as far as developing warriorship as a internal on an internal level, or was it something just more organic?
So two that stick out with me at this point in time would be ghost-like, be like the spirits, let the spirits guide you, and be one with them. So if you're one with the spirit, if you're ghost-like, A, you're stealthy, B, you have fluidity within you that's adaptable, as a soul doesn't have. It can go through walls, it can go through terrain. It doesn't get stopped, just like a strong river goes where the path of least resistance, or it makes its own pathway. And so be ghost-like, be adaptable, and have an attitude of awareness, because it was all about awareness with them and using those senses like I alluded to earlier.
Great. Well, Snake, I want to thank you again for taking time out of your schedule to talk to us about Apache knife fighting and battle tactics. We hope this is not the last time that you're on our show. I want to get you back next time to talk about Muay Thai, because you seem like an endless supply of great topics. Your training has been so diverse, and you have a lot to offer in a lot of different fields. But Snake, before we go, again, tell everybody where they can find your books and where they can find more information about your program.
Sure. Blurb, BLURB.com. On the search, type in Snake Blocker. My poetry books will pop up. A couple of Muay Thai manuals, and then the Apache journey book. And I'm hoping by the end of this year, if I can set aside a good week to kind of put some stuff together on paper, I'll have the second book. The second book's going to be pretty fascinating, because it's going to have more recipes, more medicinal information, more life-saving techniques, and more, self-preservation techniques in there than the first book or than any other compiled area. And then you can always go to my website. I have all the links to this at blockeracademy.com. But just want to say I love you all. Thanks for listening. And like I said, I don't claim to be the best of what I do, but I have a passion for what I do, and I try to be as true to the passed down information as I can be. Nothing I teach is my system. I don't claim to be a founder, like I said earlier, and I just want to keep pushing. And the more Apaches I meet, the more I will pass their oral information to our martial community.
Great. Well, Snake, thank you very much again. We appreciate you having you on, and hopefully we'll get you back on here real soon.